I'm Cynthia Sharp. I'm with Silverbow Publishing, and Candace James, the publisher, is here as well. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Doris Fiszer, our first reader today. Doris Fiszer has won awards for her poetry, including the 2017 John Newlove Award and the 2016 Tree Reading Series Chapbook Award for The Binders. The Binders was also shortlisted for the BP Nicol Chapbook Award. Her poems have appeared in journals and anthologies in Canada and the United States. Locked in Different Alphabets is her first full-length poetry collection. Doris is happily married, she's happily married as well. She's happily retired, lives in Ottawa with her husband, Bruce, and enjoys spending time with her grandchildren. So it's my great honor to introduce Doris Fiszer.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Thanks for the great introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by thanking Candace James, publisher of Silverbow Publishing, for publishing my book and organizing our launch, and Cynthia Sharp for hosting. My gratitude to J Atkinson, who encouraged me to submit my manuscript to Silverbow after hers had been accepted a few weeks earlier. Ruby Tuesdays, my poetry group, for their support and constructive comments on my poems. Claudia Radmore, Deanna Young, Mark Fruitkin, and Nadine McInnes for their feedback on my manuscript as it evolved. And thanks to everyone listening today, the poetry community, my family, friends, my sons, my grandkids, who have always been huge supporters of my work. And of course, as always, my husband, Bruce. I would like to give you a little bit of background about the family I grew up in. My parents, immigrants from Poland, survived several World War II concentration camps. My mother served in the Polish Home Army. They emigrated to Canada 4 years after the Second World War, after living in a liberation camp in Germany. My brother and I were born in Canada. My dad succeeded in saving many documents from their time in Nazi camps and after the war. He always hoped I would share their stories. Locked in Different Alphabets preserves many of their narratives and reveals how their wartime experiences impacted our lives. My book is divided into 3 sections. I'm just going to hold it up. You can see Locked in Different Alphabets. And 3 sections, my brother George, my father, and 1 on my mother. I'm going to read a few poems from each section. The first poem I'm going to read is George in grade 1. Mother's hands tremble after she hangs up the phone. She slips a cardigan over my dress, the one with the embroidered ladybug on the collar, unable to fasten the buttons. She grabs her purse and cigarettes, pulls me by the hand all the way there. As soon as we get to the school, a nun in black habit, a white wimple, veil, and crucifix waddle walks up like a gigantic penguin towards us, shoving my brother in front of her. He started a fire in the boys' bathroom. Don't bring him back until he behaves. At home, my father's ear-splitting thunder and the haze of their cigarette smoke thickening the air. The next poem I'm going to read is called Pyrolysis. Now, when I read this poem to George many years ago, he said, "Wow, I finally made it into one of your poems. Cool. If you have a poetry reading, I'm coming, as long as you have wine and food." After the time George set the kitchen curtains ablaze, I was afraid to be alone with him. He'd washed the ashes down the drain, waved away layers of gray haze that choked us both. My hands still shake when I strike a match. A whiff of smoke can sharpen my breath, hasten my step, make me think, escape. The next poem I'm going to read is called Treading Water. It started in the lake. My brother's elbows and hands held out of the water. Strengthens the legs and lungs, George said, skills acquired from his lifeguard summers. You were the golden girl. The word golden hung over the lake, a veil between us. I hated you most of the time. Mother loved you more. The past bubbled up from the lake's depths. Being golden had its price, I said. Nothing I do is good enough for father. Even my degree is the wrong one. We swam closer to the truth that afternoon. It started in the lake listening to us laugh lightheartedly as children, the lake witnessing our bobbing bodies drawing closer, watching us float into gentler water. Though my brother offered me his hand and helped me onto the dock and handed me a towel, everything familiar looked broken. The ground beneath me shaking. Next, I'm going to read a few poems from my dad's section. Now, my dad shared his wartime experiences with me when I was quite young, and then especially as he got older. The next poem is a haibun, which is a Japanese form that combines prose, which are my dad's exact words, and a haiku at the end, which sometimes can deepen the meaning of the words in the prose part. Useful. The guard asked us if anyone was a barber. I said I was. When I had to shave a man's pubic hair, I froze. The guard asked me why I said I was a barber when I wasn't. So I wouldn't be killed. Made myself become his friend. Fresh blood on razored skin. The next poem is called Snapshot 1. On Sundays, our home breathes quietly, doesn't rumble with his rage or bristle with the usual workday hurry. My father whistles, this old man in the kitchen. Bacon crackles. I sing, this old man, he played knick-knack on my thumb. Steaming cocoa, soft clouds, scrambled eggs, buttered rye toast, plum jam. Father smiles, lifts a finger. Mother's sleeping. Now, my parents were very, very close. And the next poem is a haibun and my father told me in this poem how they met. Origins. After the war, on my way to a liberation camp in Germany, I helped a woman and girl put their bags on the train. I found out they were mother and daughter. The woman pretended she knew me, told the official I was her nephew. Since he thought we were related, he let us travel together and live as family in the camp. That was your mother and her mother. That's when I fell in love with your mother. Some plants flourish after winter. My father and I, you could say, had an intense relationship. And unfortunately, my mother died unexpectedly of a stroke when she was 69. And after that, our relationship became more intense and difficult. Our single. You blamed everything on me, that new doctor you recommended. A time bomb ticked behind the gloss of your charm and repertoire of jokes, your laughter tumbling into brooding silence. You disapproved of my boyfriends, enforced curfews, had me followed after I moved out, blamed me. Your mother would still be alive if We didn't speak for months, sometimes for years. Still, once long ago, we cut a single together of a Polish love song. You held my hand while we sang, your deep baritone in harmony with my 4-year-old soprano. You patted my head when we finished. The next poem is called Binders. Now, my dad, you could say, was a collector, historian even, and was lucky to have saved many of the documents from Poland and Germany and brought them back and put them all in binders. Now, after my mother died, he declined very quickly. So, binders. We study your collection of 60 or more binders brimming with documents, each one enshrined in a plastic sleeve. You explain certificates and government papers, the years spent in Nazi camps, wedding photos of you and mother, post-war Germany, the voyage to Canada on the General J.H. McCrae. You show me certificates and diplomas from your working days at Nortel. I'll bring most of these binders to the nursing home. You wind your 7 antique clocks. I'll need a few of my clocks. You linger over your collection of hand-painted china. I want some of my porcelain too. You describe a precision instrument from lab work at Nortel, a complicated looking device that measures the width of a strand of hair. Do you want it? I'll take some of the clocks, mother's paintings, photo albums. I've changed my mind. I'm not going. I can't live in one room. We hang photos, antique clocks, hide toolboxes under the bed and in the closet, squeeze things into the dresser and night table. I'll need my teak bookcase for my binders. I cut up your hamburger, help you in and out of your chair. Now, my dad went into the nursing home using a walker. That night he fell, ended up in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He had Parkinson's. And he went through probably 5 or 6 wheelchairs. There was something wrong with every one of them. So the next one is very typical type of conversation we would have almost daily. Phone call. You signed for the wheelchair. It's your fault it's too small. I called the guy yesterday. He never showed up. Call him now. I need my granddaughter's phone number. Last time you wrote the numbers, I couldn't read them. Slow down. I can't hear you. Speak into the phone. This time my husband answers my father's call. What did my dad say? I ask. He said you can take your numbers and shove them you know where. I play Schubert's Serenade on the piano over and over. I can still hear his accusations. The next one is called Lately Everything is Language. A red wing evokes flushed cheeks. Translucent air reveals winter's landscape. A crow's unblinking eyes follow me from tree to tree as I walk. Branches wave in a different alphabet. Your voice murmurs through the pines. April is here again without you. The memory recalls all. Traces of mint candy, steaming cups of cocoa. My heart carries you. A noun, any noun, an anchor. I'm going to read a few from my mom's section. And as I told you earlier, my mom was in the underground army in Poland. My mother said, before our home burnt down at 1 Mirowska Street in Warsaw, I sketched a song sparrow perched on the windowsill and collected clusters of blushing peonies in the backyard. Before my childhood snapped shut like a fox cage, I helped my mother cut dough circles for Christmas Eve pierogi, filled their centers with sauerkraut and mushrooms, and sealed their edges with my fingers. Before I ceased being that girl, Luba and I linked arms, crossed the street to the bakery, revealed a secret over plum-filled pastries and cocoa. After the bomb blast, I searched for traces of my father, found one leather glove smoldering. The next poem is called I Knew, and it starts with an epigraph by Eleanor Fargian. The events of childhood do not pass, but repeat themselves like seasons of the year. Even in this fresh landscape, shadows veiled the sun. Wild flowers burnt to ashes. Overloaded plates of pierogi, pickled herring, and sauerkraut covered our table. Rows of Maxwell House jars, tins of habitant pea soup, crammed our basement shelves. Dresses, price tags still attached, hung like war-starved ghosts in mother's closets. The next one is about my grandmother, or babcha, as we called her. Now, just a very quick aside. She did not come to Canada at the same time as my parents. She too had been obviously with my parents in the concentration camps and had developed tuberculosis. When my parents came to Canada, they first lived in Mabu, which is a tiny, tiny little village in Cape Breton Island. They both worked in a convent. So the first paycheck my dad got, he sent the money from it and a picture of Jesus to where my grandmother was staying and getting healthy in Germany, and she came over a few months later. Babcha, grandmother. In Canada, my babcha chanted Hail Marys on her knees. To St. Francis of Assisi, she asked, "Make me an instrument of thy peace." But faulted her daughter's posture, her ways of dusting, criticizing clothes, hair, and curtain choices. My father and babcha didn't speak. To keep the peace, he said. When they forgot they weren't talking, words scorched the air. She cooked blueberry pierogi for my brother, but only offered me her life of sorrows. Parents dead from Spanish flu, death, illness, miscarriage, twin boys that lived a week. Where there is despair, hope. In her last few weeks, I manicured her nails, applied red polish, and warmed her hands. "You must be able to hear how hard my heart is beating," she said. Where there is darkness, light. My mom and I were very close and still are. Dreams over and over. My mother leaves my brother and me in front of the mall, waves, drives off. By the water behind my childhood cottage, she warns, "Don't swim out too far." Walks away, doesn't look. In hospital, she stared at her frozen arm, leg, her mouth and tongue, twisted familiar words. Refused the ice chips. The night after she died, I dreamt of her crawling from a tiny wooden box, stuffed with oversized pillows. She opened her arms to me, saying, "I was trapped inside." She is as near as the horned owl perched in the pine tree, or the fox hiding in its musky haunts. Some nights she sits in the empty chair beside me, strokes my cheek, and whispers my name. I'm going to end with Snapshot 3. He strides over to where I stand, hands me his 35mm Minolta. "I don't need it where I am," my father laughs. He straightens his tie, squeezes into his suit jacket. "A rabbi and a priest," he says, "are stopped by St. Peter at the pearly gates." He stumbles on the punchline. Father, mother, and babcha float at the base of a mountain beneath a kaleidoscope sky. Mother blows me a coral-colored kiss, checks lipstick in a compact mirror. George cycles out of an elephant-shaped cloud wearing bike shorts and a purple tie-dyed t-shirt. Babcha fingers her black rosary. Use the right exposure, my father says. Let her do it her way, my mother says. Bob just smiles, cuddles into George, cradles his arm. Take the picture, George says. I don't have all day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doris. What a deep and meaningful presentation. You can find Doris's books in Ottawa bookstores. You can have local stores order them for you. You can also find them at the Silver Bow bookstore, which I posted in the chat room. And you can also Google them. Doris and Susan are online. You can find their books on Amazon as well. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Susan J. Atkinson. Born and raised in England, Susan J. Atkinson is both an award-winning poet and an award-winning teacher. Her poems have been widely published in journals and anthologies, both in print and online. She also writes poetry and stories for children and currently lives in Ottawa, where she and her filmmaker husband have raised their 4 daughters. The Marta Poems is her first full-length poetry collection. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Susan J. Atkinson.
Thank you. My muse. I am hungry for words and scrounge at Marta's door, looking for threads that can be sewn into poems. My muse is old and tired, memory full, white head bobbing like a peony in early June. She remembers little, but I am desperate, searching everywhere for an almost poem, hoping to find it tucked perhaps in the crumpled tissues that sit like a cat on her lap. I wait for words not quite forgotten to spill from the corners of her slackened jaw, in case they fall into her softened fingers and she can pass them on. My muse is old and tired, and I almost give up when I see the threads I'm looking for hanging from the cuff of his tattered sweater knitted years ago when John was still alive and they could spit grief at each other, keeping it fresh and new so that years later it could almost be the beginning of a poem. So the Marta poems began with a muse, the little old lady who lived down my road, who once upon a time invited me in or onto the front porch so that I could tell stories, so she could tell me her stories. And we spent long afternoons together. And her stories made me sit up and think, hey, that's a poem. And hey, you are a poem. Marta, March 26, 1925. She was born early, not quite ripe, arriving in the frozen air, serenaded by bashing winds and bleating animals, sounds sung from hunger and cold. She was born early, torn from the mother's core, splitting the body in 2. There are no other details. No one spoke of her birth. She didn't know the time, whether it was light, dark, or that curious color in between when the sun settles in ribbons and there's a quietness before night. She would have liked that. So while planning the reading, I was trying to decide how I could read it sequentially without giving too much away. So like, you know, when you see the movie trailer and they pick all the great parts to show you in the movie trailer, and then you look at it and say, hey, hang on a sec, that's the movie. Like, I don't really need to see it now. So I'm trying to really balance between keeping you intrigued and, you know, getting you to take a hook there so that you're going to want to buy the book rather than it's like, whoa, yeah, I heard it all. But what I want you to realize is Marta inspired these poems. She was my muse. The poems are inspired by her. They are not her life. It is largely fictional. A lot of it completely and utterly made up. So please remember that. Okay, no, I'm just going to have some water. On loss. In this winter of frost lacing windows, bitter cold sifts into small rooms on reedy sunlight. Marta hears her father from his bed, constant cough, unfamiliar and guttural. She knows it's not good. The doctor comes, the priest comes, no one talks to Marta. The stepmother, Makaucha Anna, as she is asked to be called, is rarely home. Marta scuttles into her father's room, sideways like a crab, as if that way no one will see her. There is no one to see her anyway. She devotes long hours at her father's side, staring without touching. She dares not touch. She has been taught, washes her hands and rubs them raw. Her father passes in the night. A sudden quiet settles. His rattling breath no longer punctures Marta's dreams. By morning, his body has been taken. Marta screams until she feels her throat will bleed and the sobs will break her ribs. Her name, June 1940. Marta practices writing her name, plays at adding an H. These days, there's a lot of talk about names, how they sound, how they look, what hints they may give. Marta doesn't think she needs the H, though she can't be sure. Besides, she's only playing, and surely no one will say anything. Still, she is careful to be alone as she circles the loop of ink. A murmur on the paper through the straight line, stiff back of the letter, supporting the bend of the bridge, a perfect H, perfectly spaced between the T and the A, joining both letters as if it belonged, in case it is needed. So sprinkled throughout the collection, there's a series of diary entries that act as a vehicle to give some of the historical context or historical narrative to Marta's story. And also I was hoping that they would give her her own voice. So they are written in first person. June 12th, 1941. We've been arrested. For what, I don't know. But officers have searched our home and we are instructed to each pack a bag. I have my warmest boots and coat. Aunt Patricia said we will need them, and I have my diary and a new leather satchel and my sewing kit. We piled into an open truck with so many others, similar trucks parked outside our neighbours. We were not the only ones. Not until we arrive in the small town with a large railway junction do I experience the worst. The open truck drove up to a long cattle car and we were told to climb in with our belongings. I tripped and dropped my satchel, everything fell and I scrambled to put it all back together. But when I looked up, everyone had been pushed ahead, devoured by the crowds, and I was left alone, blown from side to side on the platform until I was lifted and thrown into the next available car. Onions. Cooped with others in cattle cars, no idea of destination, Marta licks cracked lips, jagged like broken Christmas ornaments. Dark shards stabbing her tongue, hanging like a dog, panting, desperate for water. The train stops at a station. After days of travel, wailing and howling, swelling around her, Marta guzzles boiler water, siphoned into pots, the liquid scorching into bitter sores. She does not care. She sees the soldier, smells the odor, a bucket full of white onions, perfect globes, skin so thin she can taste their hearts. Ripped lips, swollen raw, pucker, sucking hunger, she takes his stare, promising to do anything. So putting together Marta's journey often felt like doing a jigsaw puzzle, and I felt like Marta had given me a few pieces, some that didn't fit, and a whole bunch that were never there. And as I started to get further into writing and thinking that I might have a story, I was so grateful to have Marita Boresky's beautiful memoir, Roots and Uprooting, land on my lap. And as I read it, it was incredible how similar Marita's story was to Marta's. And I realized how similar for millions of Polish refugees, how this story was the same. And in fact, some of Marta's memoir inspired the missing pieces to Marta's story, especially in those Siberian years. And this is one of those poems. Sewing skills. Summer unwinds and the supply of goods worth bartering diminishes into barren air. Marta's agile fingers itch to sew as she slowly rips material from her cotton slip, shortening her hemline ever so slightly. From this length of fabric, she cuts squares and with the last of her fine thread crochets a delicate border. She makes 5 pocket handkerchiefs to sell at Sunday market. The next week, she does the same. As her slip noticeably shortens, so do the days. Fall is fast approaching, and she needs to work nights to harvest the grain. The Germans continue to advance. In the distance, dark mountains are the only promise of escape. So Marta's path continued from Siberia to Rhodesia, and this is the part that is completely and utterly poetic license and the most delicious part of the book, because the only thing I knew from Marta was that she did go to Rhodesia and that she had some certain privileges because she was a skilled seamstress. But in this section, I gave her a really torrid love affair. So here we go. Rain. January brings the heaviest of rains. Marta knows she would surely have drowned in the torrential downpours if not for this newfound love that keeps her afloat. She can't wait for work to be finished, for the storms to shelter their meetings, for the drops that are so round and big to splash into puddles like pearls. Every afternoon, the rains cascade, adding to the humidity, heating the skies and the ground so that everything drips. Even when the air clears, all that is left is the snarl of clouds, the rain quietly clicking in the trees. So from Rhodesia to England, and I had a lot of enjoyment writing this section as I brought in my own roots and upbringing, and throughout some of the poems I threaded Marta's experience with my own experiences and conversations that I'd overheard. And in the next poem that I'm going to read, it is one of the diary entries, but the diary entry is actually taken from a cycling journal that was written by my maternal grandfather, Frank. So I put his life together with Marta's. And so this is for my grandfather, Frank. April 23rd, 1946. The smash of the waves in open sea is replaced by clickety-clack of the rails as I travel north from London to Yorkshire. The ship passage was quite unremarkable, except for the joyful serenade from our Italian crew. In my carriage, I've met a young man with his bicycle. He tells me about riding through this country, his country, from John O'Groats to Land's End. During our journey, train tracks divide the fields, parting waves of green as we rush through. Frank, the young Englishman, tells me about a recent trip he took to the Scottish Highlands, how he was buffeted by rain and a bullying wind that pushed his bicycle over rough roads and desolate stretches of nothing. He was enthralled by the ghostly shapes looming behind the muffled fog, despite his orange cycling cape ripping at the buttonholes from his neck to his knees, leaving the garment to flap madly around his drenched body. He tells me he saw the most unusual sight, waves lapping over green fields, the sea on land, trees growing almost at water's edge, and thousands of shells, all colours and sizes, scattered the side of the road. It was the most delightful train ride I've experienced. Frank says I really must go and see Ben Loyal while I'm here. He says it is a mountain of majestic proportions. The Red House. At the bedsit, Marta meets a beautiful young girl with wide blue eyes who dreams of being in the movies. The young actress knows of a place where other actors meet to talk of the world and politics. The house is cradled in the heart of the pastoral mid-north, where stone divides green. The young actress wonders if Marta might like to do some sewing, perhaps make patches and armbands from scraps of red. Marta notices gold thread poking out from the actress's handbag. That night, a chain of stars chases Marta in her dreams. She stirs, feeling a slight pull, like a necklace pinching. Marta's shadow. Marta's shadow wears red sequins, long, tight dresses, stiletto heels, leaves no footprint, sneaks out after dark, prowls like a stray cat, comes home muddy and tired, a moon, a silver scythe in her eye, stars sweetening her breath. Marta's shadow would never have done what Marta did, wouldn't have stayed with the nervous soldier holding his shrieking heads night after night. Not Marta's shadow. She'd drown a man lost at sea rather than curl her arms around to save him. And finally, Marta finds her home in Canada. I don't know if she ever did find that better life that she was searching for, but in Canada, she did build a home. The colour of home. New home in a new country, Marta's books and sewing patterns furnish bare rooms. The house is small and attached on one side, but theirs nonetheless. Marta is hopeful in her new home, in her new country, their family will grow. The street is quiet, young trees line its sides, ash and linden, with small leaves that offer music in the gentle mornings, as cardinal hops from twig to grapevine, red darting between leaves. Marta spends these early hours in the garden. Alison hems the front, and small yellow flowers polka dot the lawn, reminding her of the golden glow of childhood buttercups under her chin. Now, in her own home, she will have everything. She will bake decadent desserts with creamy butter and dark brown sugar. She will sew lace curtains with delicate scalloped edges to blow breezily at the small front window. And in the back, where the southern exposure catches afternoon sun, she will grow vegetables and fruit. Perhaps by the fence, a strawberry patch from which she will pick only the ripest red to make jams and pies. There will be cucumbers to pickle and put up in the cold cellar beside the beets that stain the kitchen counter as she cuts into deep purple flesh, reminding her of home and its narrow fields and meadows coloured with warm ochre, wheat and rye and the fresh green of potato plants, all abandoned in the home she had fled years and years before. Oh, how we danced. Marta is tired but happy. Irena has brought light into John's eyes, life into his bones. Marta has not been able to settle the child, but John cradles the tiny swaddle and waltzes around the small sitting room. Irena's eyelids drop. She sleeps peacefully, safe in the nest of his arms. And now this is where it gets really tricky. So I'm only going to read one more because I don't want to give anything else away. So this is my last one. Making plans. The rain has fallen steadily since early morning. It pools around the terracotta pot left out all winter. It collects in the ruts where ice has damaged the path. Marta has waited for this rain, for this spring. But now April is here, and she is tired from grey, pressing on bones, already aching from the long winter and what death has stolen from her. Stuck inside, she plans the garden. Brambles and thorns left to sprawl wildly weave around the small house, like a forest in a long ago fairy tale. Marta gathers herbs to plant, miracles to cure, orders seeds to scatter around the yellow rose bush, St. John's wort, and a fringe of lavender and thyme to put around the peony stalks that she let flop. In this year of loss, Marta is afraid to leave the house, afraid of losing her way. She shoves breadcrumbs into pockets just in case, collects pieces of thread, saves everything to rescue hope. Even the blue jays slump as the rain continues to stream, its weight battering her to exhaustion. The vines flap madly, shaking water from their thorns. Marta wonders if she pricks her finger, could she sleep through it all?
Thank you so much, Susan, for such an engaging and beautiful reading.
Thank you. Can I just say something? Because I've saved my thank yous till the end. And to me, this is like the most important part of this afternoon. And I want to thank every single person that is with us today and now for taking time out of your busy lives and days to share this with us. And it's not just today. And I know Doris feels the same way. This is all these years of loving us and supporting us and just culminating into being. So thank you. And Cynthia, thank you for being such an incredible hostess and a great whiz with the technology. And Doris, what an incredible reading. I'm telling everybody, if you haven't bought her book, you buy her book. It's phenomenal. And what an amazing adventure to share together. Like, you're the best stablemate. I want to thank the Rubies and the Other Tongue critique groups. Like, you guys have seen these earlier poems and your amazing comments and all of your help has made them into being part of the collection. And I really want to say thank you to Rhonda Douglas, who has been a terrific mentor and who supported me from the beginning, gave me the confidence to actually submit the manuscript. And of course, I need to thank Tony and the girls, because they always listen and just tell me it's lovely, which is all I really need to hear, right? And most importantly, none of us would be here today if it wasn't for Candice James. So Candice, publisher, editor extraordinaire, I can't believe that you took a chance on my manuscript when it arrived on your doorstep. So it'll always be a thank you. It's amazing. And obviously to Marta and to Marita, thank you for showing us how extraordinary the ordinary is. So thank you, everybody. All right, I'm done. Thanks.
Wonderful. It was such a treat to get to hear these readings. And of course, you can order both of these books from any bookstore in Canada. You can go support your local bookstore wherever you are in the country, and they can order it for you. You can also find them online at the Silver Bow bookstore, which I posted in the chat room a few times. And they're also both on Amazon. And I have a few questions for Susan and Doris. So I'm going to ask each of them 3 questions, and then after that, we'll open it up to the chat room. If people have any more questions, they can post them in the chat room. We'll ask everyone to keep your microphones off because there's almost 90 of us here. So I think it's the most well-attended. We'll have to check with Candice. I'm going to say it's probably the most well-attended Silver Bow book launch I've been to. So this is really an honor to have so many wonderful participants. So my first question, I'll ask Doris first. How long did it take to complete your manuscript? And did it take turns you didn't expect along the way?
Well, first of all, Susan, fantastic reading. I really enjoyed your reading. And she has a great book, wonderful book. But how long did it take? Well, it was a complicated process. And I would say probably close to 20 years. Earlier poems were primarily about my dad because he had shared some stories with me. So basically, I guess I just had a handful of poems that I thought, well, my grandkids, my children, my niece, maybe I should just write about my dad and my mom so that I can pass that on to them as a bit of history. But then I guess over the years, I realized that maybe his life, my mother's life, would have more universal appeal to anyone who survived uh, the war or immigrated or all those situations. So then I started writing more poems about my mother, my father, and I realized, oh, this is a story. And then, of course, the George poems, some of them which I read at the beginning, they were written last. And I thought, well, I can't have a book about my family without my brother. So lots of unexpected turns. It was exciting, at times frustrating. But since I retired, I guess in 2014, I've had more time. And I belong to this wonderful group, many people who are here, and they have looked at these poems and given me wonderful feedback. So it was a complicated but very rewarding process for me.
I think you gave that's some really good advice, I think, to writers to take time. I got to hear Rachel Rose speak yesterday. I know a lot of people in the audience got to hear Rachel Rose, the judge of the Fred Cogswell Book Awards. And she mentioned that the manuscripts she thought were the strongest, were the ones where people took the time to let the work come through, to polish it. You're such a great example of the value of taking your time to create a masterpiece.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for sharing so much of it with us. It's an incredible story that makes you just want to go out and have to get the book. And then we're just going to go over to Susan and ask you the same question. How long did it take you to complete your manuscript? And did it take turns along the way that you didn't expect?
Well, I first met Marta, or I first started talking to Marta in 2005. And as she told me the stories, and I was just so fascinated. I think we just ended up having this real mutual love and respect for each other because we were just so different. But it wasn't until 2007 when I wrote the first poem about her, and first couple of poems got published, and I think I started thinking, hey, this could be something more. But I let it sit for quite a long time. A lot of it was I didn't really know what direction I wanted it to go in, whether or not it was going to be just a story that was just about this one character, or what it was going to end up being. So I did let it sit for a long time. And then I would have to say in 2016, I picked it back up, and that's when it really started to take shape. And I think the biggest turn that it took was thinking about having the diary entries and somehow trying to link it so that it would become a story, and that it would be something that was a collection of poems that all had this singular thread. Yeah, so it's been a journey. It is a journey.
Very interesting. I'm going to go back over to Doris and ask, what challenges, Doris, did you face putting together your collection? And did you always think of the poems as being a narrative?
Well, many challenges, I guess. And the biggest one for me was fear. Fear of getting the facts wrong about my parents' lives and the war. Fear that I had painted too harsh a picture of my dad and brother. And I guess fear of putting my own voice into the collection. I know I needed to add it, but I didn't know how to do that without feeling guilty, because from a young age, I knew my parents had suffered a lot and had had a lot of trauma. And so anything in comparison, how do you respond to that? So I guess it made me from a young age to be quite empathetic to what they had gone through. So that was a challenge. Their health was fragile as well too. Now, I guess what spurred me along to get over this particular challenge, my dad, he knew I was writing something, but to be honest, I didn't share a lot because maybe he would want to change it and things like that. But I showed him a few and I knew he was proud of me. I knew that. He said so. And he said, look it, I know I'm difficult. I've always been difficult. You want to tell the world? Go right ahead. And so that gave me a lot of courage. And you know what? I just kept writing. And the more I wrote about my parents' lives, the more I realized, you know what? They loved me. I was loved and I loved them. I mean, every family has difficult dynamics, right? But at the bottom line is there was love. And I tried to show that, I guess, in my manuscript. And then when I started writing, I knew it had to be in poetry form. And to me, poetry is concise, precise, and it captures a moment. And some of my poems are even called snapshot, like a snapshot or a painting. And you can read my book like a novel. And I guess that's what makes maybe my book and Susan's book unique, because it does read like a novel, yet I feel that many of my poems stand alone. And the other thing I like about the poetry form is that you can leave a lot out and leave things to the reader's imagination. So there's a lot left out that I could have said, but I chose not to. So I guess that's the answer to that.
You're both such good examples of blending your own voice in with your work. I think you both do that wonderfully, and it's such a testament to the importance of courage to tell our own stories. I know most people in the audience, many people in the audience are writers as well. And you do such a good job of setting an example of the importance of honoring our own voice and story, whatever it is. So I'm going to head over to Susan. I'm asking her the same question. What challenges did you face putting together your collection? And did you always think of the poems as being a narrative?
I think the first challenge was deciding how I wanted to tell a story. So I'm also answering your other question. Yes, I knew it was always going to be a story, but was whether I was going to do it as first person or in third person. So it became this tricky question of the idea that Marta was my muse. Her story was inspiring my poems, but did I know enough about her that I could give her voice to the poems, or was it my voice in the poems? So it was like such a tough challenge. And so I have other poems that I've written about Marta that are more the relationship between her and I. And then there was this big decision, like, do I put those into this particular collection, which of course I haven't. So if there is anybody out there who wants a little chapbook that's just called Marta and Me, that's the poet and the muse, just let me know. But once I decided that it was going to be Marta's story, it would have been third person, and I decided about the diary entries, then it started to click along and made it easier, which brought me to probably the biggest challenge of all. I like to think that I'm a poet and that I have written poems that have become a story, not stories, not a story that was written in poetry. So that is like the biggest thing, I think. Just as Doris mentioned, it's that idea that the poems can stand alone, that they don't have to be a part of a narrative, that you don't need one for the other, that you can read them and they're poems, as opposed to, well, it's a story.
So interesting. I think we were talking about the fact that when we first crossed paths in about 2013 to 2015, you contributed My Muse Refused to Visit to Poetic Portions, which was an Earth Day celebration book we put out here in Vancouver. And I've always been interested in that voice and character. Was that Marta as well?
Yes, so that's what's so funny. So for everybody else that's out there in the virtual world with us right now, Cynthia and I are actually just meeting for the first time, although our paths did cross all those years ago now. because of poetic portions that Cynthia had put together. And yes, so back then I was torn between that whole how would I write about this character and where do I fit in those poems, or do I? And in the end, I didn't, except for the fact that my own experiences are threaded throughout.
I was always very engaged by that poem, and it felt like it had so much story to it. It had so much mysticism. It has so much mysticism to it. And so it's been such a gift to get to see this whole book now, all about Marta.
Thank you.
You've done such a wonderful job of weaving narrative. And I love that you're a poet first, but you have a story to tell when you put it all together. And then
Thank you.
we'll go back over, I'll ask you both. We'll start with Doris. What are you working on now? What's your next step, Doris?
Well, to be honest, 20 years is a long time to have kind of a project in mind. So, but I was compelled and obsessed with this collection. And now that it's done, I don't have a lot of new material, but I feel freer to experiment with different poetry forms. And I guess I've always been fascinated by the complexities and mysteries of life. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm exploring topics like dreams, loss, death, and life after death. My mother and I, this is one thing I'll share with you, we always shared our dreams. And I have recorded my dreams since I was a child. And even though I'm not writing a collection about my parents right now or anything like that, sometimes they sneak into my dreams. And I'm having fun using some of these dream images in my poems. And I don't really know where these poems are going to take me. So I'm open to a new adventure.
Really exciting to bring in dreams and all the imagery from dreams. So we'll be keeping a lookout for Doris Fisher's next project. And we'll head over to Susan and ask you the same question. What are you working on now? What's next for you?
Well, I'm actually getting excited about doing what I'm hoping is going to be maybe final edits on a chapbook that the wonderful, incredible Claudia Coutu-Radmore is going to publish through her Bondi Studios press. And it's a super fun little chapbook called The Birthday Party, The Mariachi Player, and The Tourist. And it takes place through one night. It's 18 poems that all follow the same form, and there's 7 couplets throughout, and they have a singular thread that ties them together, and a well-known mariachi song that runs throughout the bottom. It's fun, and it's very different from the Marta poems. So I'm looking forward to that. So
very exciting. So we have lots to look forward to from both of you. And just before we go, I'm going to ask if anyone in the audience wants to ask anything in the chat room. If you have any more questions for Susan or Doris, you can just type them into the chat room and I'll ask. There are tons and tons of wonderful comments that I'm going to send to Susan and Doris. The chat room is so filled with comments, I can't possibly read them all. But I'll be sending Susan and Doris the copy of all these beautiful comments. I think we may have covered everything. I think you've both done such a great job presenting your material and giving us some insight into how it all came about. So I think we're about ready to end. So I just want to thank Susan and Doris for their wonderful presentation, Candace James, the owner of Silver Bow, for her incredible hard work. She always does an outstanding job putting great books together and bringing them to the public. We want to thank everyone for coming out, all of our friends. There's Susan's book, you can see.
I know, I forgot to show you, sorry.
Yeah, and I'll hand over Susan and Doris. Do you have any final words you'd like to say to anyone?
Thank you.
Just thank you, everyone. This is just overwhelming to have so much support. I really appreciate it. And I know Susan does as well. It's been a lot of fun.
So I'm just going to thank everyone again. What an honor it's been to host such talented writers. We're so grateful that you chose Silver Bow Publishing. And there's no other, I think I will just let everybody go. So thank you everyone for coming out today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.